Welcome to Sage Women, the podcast where wisdom meets empowerment. I'm Melanie White, your host, and I invite you to join us for inspiring stories and evidence-based insights that support women's health. From expert advice to real-life experiences, we'll help you to thrive through menopause and beyond. And remember to hit the subscribe button so that you get the latest updates every fortnight. Hi, it's Melanie here on the Sage Women podcast, and today I'm interviewing our co-founder, Dr. Nick Engerer. Nick, welcome and thanks for being here.
Yeah, Melanie, I get to chat to you all the time, but this is our first foray into the podcast world together, so I think it should be fun.
I'm looking forward to it, and of course, you can call me Mel as usual.
Got it.
I guess today we're going to be talking about menopause from a longevity mindset point of view. And I guess just to kick off, I suppose I'd love to know a bit about you and your backstory and how you got to be at this point and thinking about longevity, particularly in the context of women's health.
Yeah, it's always a bit of one that deserves some explanation when I step up and I'm in a business that I've co-founded for women's health that focuses particularly on challenges related to menopause. So
yeah,
gets you wondering, like, all right, what's his story?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a fun one for me because it's so important to me, story and meaning and purpose and the why behind anything I do. I can get to points in my life where I have to go all the way back to the why in order to keep going. Because if I don't know it, the how doesn't matter. Yeah. And that has always been a strong characteristic of mine. And I ended up in Australia to do my PhD back at the ANU, working in, of all things, in solar energy, because my background was in atmospheric science. And I had quite a bit of success collaborating with industry in my PhD and follow-on research work there at the ANU that allowed me to spin off and start a tech company called Soulcast, which we grew and scaled over 6 and a bit years. And I exited from at the end of 2022. Amazing journey that took me through learning how to write papers, get grants, scale companies, build products, build a team, get investors, travel the world and sell the message, master the marketing, but most importantly, to have a real purpose that drives what you do. Again, the why always mattered to me. Yeah. We needed to have a clear mission, a clear reason why we were existing. And that type of mindset's what I've brought to my afterlife after exiting the company in terms of, okay, well, what do I want to work on next? And that's where my interest in longevity and human health was clearly the next step for me. I had a strong personal experience with the mother of my son having a cancer journey, 2 really major operations that after I emerged from toward the tail end of 2017, I started asking, why are we getting these late stage disease diagnoses for cancer or heart disease or any of the other age-related diseases when we have the technology to detect them years earlier?
Yeah.
And I went and did some homework on that and found we do, in fact, have clinics that will scan your whole body with an MRI and sequence your genome and do all your blood work and can find disease early. And that was almost a decade ago. That technology has come leaps and bounds since. There's now blood tests that can identify 60 different types of cancer at an early stage in your blood. Wow. And I call this entire development longevity technologies because they're technologies that are helping us live healthier for longer. And that's what I've began to really put my attention into and my efforts into, spreading the word about that, interviewing companies, learning about founders, checking out their products, being a guinea pig. And interestingly, as I was exploring business opportunities in this space, our co-founder at Sage, David, told me after some back and forth, so maybe it's gonna be blood testing, oh, maybe it's gonna be personalized analytics. One day, David came to me and said, Nick, it's gonna be menopause. And I laughed at him. I said, it's not gonna, why would I go work in menopause? Just immediate dismissal.
Yeah.
He's like, no, you got to talk to Mel. And I had a chat with you. And then I went and looked at the data behind women looking for help with menopause symptoms. And it dawned on me, this is women's longevity. This is the biggest, if not the piece of women's longevity. And there's some bits and pieces we can dive into there further, but that's my, it's not exactly an elevator pitch, but it is the arc of the story that brings me here.
I love that journey, Nick. Knowing you, I know how all of these pieces weave together, and hopefully it's clear to people listening. And I heard you touch on something a few times, is living a long and healthy life. And I'm thinking about, for women particularly, the difference between our health span and our lifespan. There's a gap there of 11.7 years. So for people listening to this, if you live to the age of 90, it means you'll be in poor health from the age of 88 and a bit. 78 and a bit until 90. So that's a long time to be in poor health at the end of your life. And I think, Nick, what you're saying is if we look back earlier in someone's life and we understand the pathways that might trigger disease and the risks of disease, then we have the opportunity to intervene early. And it's personalized for each person. So how do we help a person optimize their health and therefore create that health span and lifespan?
Yes, well said. And in particular, those are the two key components of this term, longevity. That we're talking about health span, how many years can we healthfully live, and lifespan, what is the maximum number of years we can live. And of course, we want the smallest delta between those two numbers, because being weak and sick and dependent late stage in life is on no one's list of desires. No one wants that. We'd much rather go out doing something we love than after 10 years of assisted living. So that goal is very achievable. And I say the most important thing in that is having the right mindset, having a longevity mindset. And in fact, I say longevity itself is a mindset. It's not a thing you can achieve. It's something that you have as a mindset that sticks with you your whole life by definition.
So what is a longevity mindset? Talk us through that.
Well, a longevity mindset has its roots in a growth mindset. And look, I came across this term from someone who influenced my thinking a lot, Peter Diamandis, who has really big thinking. In fact, he founded one of the companies that I went to do full body MRI called Human Longevity Inc. The location was formerly known as the Health Nucleus, and you could go get a full body MRI, full bloods, all the things I mentioned before. He's one of the guys that made that possible, saying like, look, we don't have to get late stage disease diagnosis. He likes to say, don't die from something stupid. And pretty soon you're going to be able to live a very, very long time, if not forever, as some people like to say. I don't mind that part so much.
Yeah.
But he started talking about this term, longevity mindset. And I liked it. It really resonated with me. And I listened to him talk about it with his partner, Dan Sullivan, and their podcast. But there just wasn't very much meat on the bones, right? There's some great ideas in there. And so I took that term as like, you know what? I'm going to figure out what that is. I'm going to define what it is. I'm going to build out programs that help people adopt that in their life. So taking it beyond just a nice word that makes us feel good and makes us think, okay, if I have the right thoughts, I'll live longer, which I do think is true. Yeah. We really need to have some nuts and bolts on that. And I equate it with a growth mindset that comes out of the work of Carol Dweck, of course, where we're learning that, look, if I put in the hard work, if I put in the effort, if I'm willing to tolerate occasional failure, if I lean into my fear, I can acquire new skills, accomplish different things, become a different person. That's not actually the mindset that most of us come into our health with. In fact, the vast majority of people are, more or less programmed. And I don't say that in a nefarious way. It's just social conditioning, cultural conditioning, that you will get old. When you get old, you will get weak and sick and dependent. And you have to take 5 pharmaceuticals until you go to the assisted living and somebody else has to give you a sponge bath each day and help you use the toilet. Like, that's the way we think we're going. And I say that's not true. That's not destiny. That is not destiny. And that's the first part of the longevity mindset. There's 2 key realizations. The first one is that disease is not destiny. You do not have to get old and become weak and sick and dependent. You can grow older and keep many youthful characteristics, most importantly in your mind, and also manage your health risks accordingly, that you do not have to develop several age-related diseases. You can stay healthy. And that number 2, the second key realization is that the longer you're alive, the more technology is here to keep you healthy. Every day, that's increasing. And with the advent of these large language models with AI, it's a great example to look to. You can talk to Grok. Her name is Ara. She's making me pronounce it correct. She's got a bit of an attitude. It's funny. I think it's actually Era. It's actually Era. It's not Ara, it's Era. And I can talk to her like she's my therapist, like she's a doctor, like she's an assistant, all these different bits and pieces. Then I can even ask her to analyze my blood work, right? I can ask her questions about health, things that are going on for me, and she can give me insights. And in fact, I gained insights from talking to Grok using AI, particularly with my blood work, that my functional health medicine practitioner missed, that my GP missed, that my coach missed, that were important. Wow. And so these technologies are right in front of us. They're innumerable. We could name many, many of them that are making us live healthfully for longer. And that's something that once we realize those two things, we're on our way to having a longevity mindset, because our perspective, a realization, a change in your view of reality occurs. And all of a sudden you see things differently. That's what a longevity mindset is at its essence.
It's so interesting, those two parts. And if we could pick up on the first one, you were talking about the fact that we're not wired to think with a growth mindset. And I love that you mentioned Carol Dweck's work, and we might put a link to some of her books in the show notes for this. I'm thinking about my mother, who at a certain age decided to cut her hair, decided to start wearing pleated woolen twin sets and grey, and get a perm and a blue rinse. Well, not a blue rinse, but I'm sorry, Mum, if you're listening. She's 90 this year, which is a testament to looking after yourself. She went on the Pritikin diet when she was in her early 50s because she had a congenital heart issue. But I'm just thinking about how people behave and how people dress and how people show up with the expectation that they're getting older. We can't go out now. I can't drive. I can't do this. I must sit home and watch Coronation Street or whatever it is. I don't know how many people I've seen through my growing up years, my parents, just going down that pathway. I can't do this anymore. I'm too old for that. I can't wear those clothes anymore. Almost like we're reinforcing the unhelpful belief that, well, everything's just downhill from now. And yet, I think more recently, perhaps, and I'd love to hear your view on this, we're seeing people joining the University of the Third Age. We're seeing people pick up post-retirement careers. And I'm just wondering if you've seen a shift like that in society that might help us to develop a growth mindset, or what else do we need to do to bring this to the mainstream?
That's exactly my goal, to bring this to the mainstream, to bring the realizations of what this longevity future has to offer us, particularly in reducing human suffering and increasing the quality and duration of our life, particularly the quality. And so I actually had a really great experience with a gentleman, Bradley Sherman, who studies the demographics of aging and actually advises businesses like IBM on how to adapt to a changing landscape in terms of the age of employees and their productivity. And I had this conversation with him on the set of recording our docuseries, Reversed: The Race for Longevity, which you can watch on Glued TV. Soon you'll be able to watch it on E360. Hopefully we'll get it on somewhere a little easier to watch, like Amazon Prime. That's in the works. But the conversation that we had was precisely this, that people who are working and are healthy and motivated and enjoying what they're doing are wanting to work longer. And in fact, the opposite, the corollary to that is that, particularly in some of the cultures that he's studied, like the Japanese culture, he sees that when men who are so wrapped up in work as purpose retire, they often die quite soon afterwards, because work was purpose, work was their social life, work was everything. And we're seeing that this shift in people being able to be healthy for longer means that there's actually more productivity to be had in the workforce at a large scale, because many people are now living into their 60s, late 60s, early 70s, and they have great cognitive function, they have great motivation, they have good energy levels, they feel a sense of purpose, and they want to keep working. And in a way, the entire concept of retirement, from my point of view, for somebody particularly in my age demographic, is more or less an optional concept. I don't think about retiring at all. I will never retire. Why would I retire? Why would I stop working at doing what I love, because that's how I'm choosing to live my life. If, my father just sent me a message yesterday saying, I'm retiring from working at the company he's worked at for 42 years this month.
Wow.
And he's done. And I know he's hung on for that. It hasn't necessarily been something he's always loved doing, and he's kind of done with it and over it. And I think that mentality is part of what's changing in society. There's not going to be a lot of this stay with the same company for that entire period of time. There's going to be a lot more reinvent yourself multiple times along the way, because you can be sharp and vigorous and driven into years that used to be ones you think you'd spend on the couch or on the golf course. And I'm walking testament to that. I'm currently studying to be a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
No, that's a complete change in my life direction. But I look at that and think, well, that's what I can do for the next 10 to 20 years, and then reinvent myself again after that. Again, these are parts of the longevity mindset. And we see evidence of this happening, although people might not call it that, already happening in the workforce when you talk to people who are experts on this topic.
So at its core, it's really about having meaning and purpose in your life.
It's definitely part of it. And that's nothing new. There's lots of different ways to view that, and we know how important that is. And in fact, one of the things that I'd like to spend a bit more time studying, and I've done some early research on this, is that we hear a lot about these blue zones in longevity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's so hyped. There's Netflix documentary. Dan Buettner's work has had a resurgence 10 years later. And now you can go to the airport. There's a blue zones store in the airport in Costa Rica because it's one of the blue zones. And when you really look at some of these, there's actually some debate in the longevity sphere around whether the statistics on these things really add up. But we do see there, what do we see? We see people with a lot of function late in life and a lot of health late in life. But I'd argue that the most important thing that they actually have is their social structure and their sense of purpose. And they don't have that, oh, well, I'm done now, so I can ease back and stop working hard. They're still gardening. They're still bringing water up a flight of stairs every day. They are still doing things that push them, that drive them, that require physical demands from them. And the reason they're still doing that is because they have this healthy mindset of like, I'm going to get up each day and do the things I love, take care of myself, be a part of my community. They have that purpose. I think that that's really what's going on there. Sure, they've eaten well and they live in a healthy environment, and those things are really, really important. And they're getting good physical activity. But really, what do they have the most? They have a really strong reason to wake up each day.
And that social connection, as you mentioned, strong family units, families all living together, small, tight communities that barter and support each other. And I've heard about some of the one of the Greek blue zones where there's very low crime because everyone knows everyone's business. And if someone's caught doing something wrong, everyone goes, rah, 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 and wags their finger at that person. So it's trial by community, which is really interesting. Yeah.
It's a great example of some internal accountability in community and how important that can be.
Yeah. And so one of the things that comes to my mind while we're having this conversation is that everyone's busy. We're all on the hamster wheel. We're churning along with family, with work, with sport, with kids, with dogs, with friends, with social stuff, whatever it is. And we're just churning, not necessarily taking time out to reflect on what matters to us, what our purpose is. And I think menopause, apart from being a huge biological transformation, a physiological transformation, it's also a time where we really question, who am I? My identity. We've got a decrease in energy, our hormones change, and suddenly we're left saying, well, I'm not a mother anymore, as in child raising age. I'm at the peak of my career. I've got aging parents. I've spent all this time thinking about other people and things. Who am I now? And it's a very critical question because a lot of people see it as a negative. Oh, what have I got left? Rather than what is the opportunity. So in terms of what you're saying about this longevity mindset, I think it's a perfect time for someone in menopause to think, what am I capable of? What could be next on my horizon? What would get me going again? What would help me to feel reinvigorated? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's a beautiful time in your life to reinvent yourself, which is what I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying. And in some ways, you'll be bound by certain constraints, like you
Yeah.
have a certain well-established role in a career, perhaps that you've earned. You'll have a set of responsibilities, perhaps to children that are still depending on you a little bit, or aging parents, as you've suggested. And those things are very real pressures against
Mm-hmm.
all the physiological things that might also be happening for you. But yet, one of the most important assets that you could have during that entire period of time is your mindset, because it's one of the few things in that list that you can fully control.
Yeah.
And so it's absolutely the opportunity to adopt a longevity mindset and to think, well, I'm going through this very significant change in my body, and it's not going to be easy. But it's also not necessarily going to be characterized by everyone else's experience. It
Mm.
is going to be characterized by mine. And if I realize that I am perimenopausal, or that I am now menopausal, that I am only here for my own experience. I'm here to manage my own experience. I can learn from others. I can learn from resources that are available to me. And in fact, that's very healthy to do so. But projecting onto myself what will or will not happen to me, or what this means for me, and creating limitations for myself, that's where things start to become dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in the work I've done with longevity mindset, I've actually built a free longevity mindset course that you can find on my website. And one of the things that I like to pull out is this concept of longevity legends, I call them. They're people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s, who are doing extraordinary things.
Mm.
And every single one of those women that's a longevity legend is in menopause or postmenopausal, right? They, particularly the women who are powerlifting, I got a woman who's powerlifting in her 80s named Shirley.
Wow.
Amazing, right?
Yeah.
She didn't even start until she was in her mid 70s, and she can deadlift as much as I can,
Wow.
right? So this this idea that I'm going to get old and become weak and sick and dependent, this is the beginning of the transition for you to make decision. Are you going to believe that, or are you going to stay, bring a youthful mindset, accept that your body is changing, but that you still have many things that you can do to take care of your health? And in fact, it's an opportunity to refocus on that.
Mm.
Menopause is a perfect opportunity to be adopting a longevity mindset and thinking, in particular, how do I have a strong sense of purpose that works for me now, that was different 5 years ago? What is the strong sense of purpose that I can have now, so that I have a reason to wake up and keep going each day and to make these changes? And again, we mentioned the University of the Third Age. I mentioned studying to become a psychotherapist, and I turned 40 this year, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm going back to school in a way that you can do that, and you can
Mm.
keep doing that. And if you think with a longevity mindset from your beginning of your menopause years, you've got decades ahead to do something meaningful. So I do think that that's a perfect time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as you were talking, I was thinking about role models that you're mentioning. And one of my role models has just died earlier last year, aged 101. Her name was Iris Apfel. I don't know if you've heard of her. She was on Instagram, and she was this fashionista, for want of a better word. She would go to op shops and high-end clothing stores and pull together outfits, and she was bright and colorful and had huge glasses, and she'd be on Instagram posing. And I thought, wow, look at her. She's not just sitting around watching telly and drinking cups of tea. She's and feeling miserable. I think when you have a lot of time on your hands, it's easy to become too introspective and to maybe dwell on things that aren't so helpful. But she had found purpose in this love for style and fashion, and she was an incredible inspiration to a lot of people. She even had I think a Barbie doll made in her honor. So it's just going to the role modeling side of things, and who else is out there that's doing these things. It's a bit like, I would call it the Roger Bannister effect. No, nobody could run a 4-minute mile until Roger Bannister did it, and then suddenly everyone could do it. And perhaps that is a really critical part of developing a longevity mindset, is to say, who has gone before me, and what are they doing? Where am I getting my inspiration from?
I love that. I love Iris already. She's absolutely an example of a longevity legend. And it sounds like she had fun until she
Yeah.
ended her life and ended her time here with us on this planet. And that's exactly the way that we should all be trying to live the end of our life, is having fun, enjoying it, and having enough independence to keep doing things that we love until we can't anymore. And the 4 minute mile effect that you've just pointed out, there is most certainly that in the longevity space. We have this particular woman, French woman, Jean Clement, I think was her name. I might be getting that slightly wrong. But she lived to be 122 years old, and nobody's
Wow.
broken through that yet. And apparently she liked smoking cigarettes and didn't exactly live the healthiest, but she had something else going on for her. And so we have this glass ceiling or this invisible finish line that's out there that says, no, can't go past that. And I firmly believe that there are humans alive now that will surpass that barrier. It's an invisible one. It's just like that 4 minute mile. And in fact, I really like that as an analogy because we simply have greater access to understanding of our health. We have a profound understanding of diseases and what drives their development. And we also have an increasing array of longevity technologies to support us on our journey. And so humans are already going to be pushing that limit. The challenge is that we can't prove that with science in a randomized control, placebo, double blind, all the et cetera, you can add to that caveated way that will satisfy people en masse that that's possible because it takes too long. It takes over 100 years to prove that. Yeah. But I firmly believe that we're already pushing past that limit with the resources we have now.
So what I come back to is daily life for a typical person. They're thinking, this sounds exciting, but I've got to go to work today. My kids are busy. And they get dragged back into the mire of stuff. And it might not be a mire, but they get dragged back into their life. And we know that something like 99% of what we do each day is the same as yesterday, and 95% of our habits are unconscious. And that we're all different. We all have different needs, different risks, different backgrounds. Where it's highly personalized journey. So how do we navigate that going forward? How do we get the motivation to get started and the momentum, the consistency required to carve a better path, even in a small way?
Yeah, I love that because it's very practical, right? So this is why I built a framework that a longer life where there's 4 parts. And the first part is longevity mindset, right? So the things we're talking about adopting, having the realizations that my health future is in my control. I'm not destined to disease. And technology is creating more and more resources all the time for me to utilize. And those things, I hope if people really come to them as a realization, it will create some excitement and motivation. Like, oh, wow, I have control over my health future. What I choose matters. It's not just simply my genes. And in fact, the second part is getting into a longevity strategy, because once you start to look at all the things that you can do for yourself, it's immediate overwhelm. It's like, oh, wow, okay. As soon as I start even following a few people about longevity on Instagram, I'm going to get advertisements for red light therapy and longevity supplements and exercise programs, coaching. Just here comes the barrage. Here comes the overwhelming amount of information. And I like to give people the visual of just walking down the supplement aisle at your pharmacist, chemist, grocery store, and think about just here, just in this aisle, how many hundreds of different choices do I have to make? Okay? Right? To just even pick out the right thing for myself. That's why we have a strategy. We develop a longevity strategy through 2 primary mechanisms. One is we look at our family health history. So we can see, okay, this is a pretty good marker for what I am most vulnerable to genetically, from looking at what my parents have gone through, or related aunts and uncles, grandparents. What diseases of aging did they experience? Those are your most likely candidates. And then we can fill that in with well-chosen genetic testing. And all this strategy work is doing is it's helping you identify your vulnerabilities. It's not actually your destiny still not your destiny. It's telling you in your genome, your DNA, your genome, wrapped up all there in your chromosomes. It's telling you what the chinks in your armor are, what your vulnerabilities are, what you're most likely to develop. And so then you can pick out those top 3 things and you just start working on those. You just start there. For me, I know that I have retinal health issues in my family health history. And in my genome, I have a risk above average, well above average risk for age-related macular degeneration. So what do? Well, it'd be great to regularly go see my optometrist, get my eyes checked for one. But also I can start in that supplement aisle and go pick up some zeaxanthin, some carotenoids, some supplements that are really well established for macular health, for taking care of my eyes and my retina. And I can start taking that as early as possible, stick it in my stack, take it every day. I've helped manage my risk. And I know that that investment is worth it. Small change, relatively inexpensive one that I can be doing for my longevity over the long term that doesn't take too much because I took the time to analyze my risk. I say the same thing to men in prostate cancer. It is so cheap to take 12 to 25 milligrams of lycopene a day. You've all got a prostate. And most men die with prostate cancer, not from it, but with it. My grandfather on my father's side included. In fact, his was a bit more aggressive, and it did actually lead to one of the things that took his life. So I'm on that lycopene. Very simple, easy thing. All I've got to do is buy enough ahead of time that I've got it, take it once or twice a day. Big change for me. That's really valuable. Those are really easy changes that we've made by understanding our risk. And in fact, it's not even supplements that can help us make the biggest changes. It's actually adjusting our lifestyle factors, which is the third part of the framework. And we can talk a bit more about those if you'd like.
Yeah, I would love to talk about lifestyle factors because at the end of the day, I'm thinking about supplements, and I take supplements myself, different kinds at different stages. But for me, let's say I've got an ApoE4 gene, right? And I know that if I eat sugar, I want to eat much more sugar all day, every day. I'm really, really sensitive to sugar. So I really got to watch my health risks. And I'm thinking, okay, what are all of the daily habits that I could do to manage my health risks in that context? Because it's more than just supplements. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of other things that are going to impact the expression of that gene.
Yeah, then in that important last part is where the moneymaker is. And this is one of the more powerful things that we've realized, and I talk about this in the free longevity mindset course, is that it's actually not our genes that determine what happens to us. It is our epigenome. So our DNA, what we think of in terms of that double helix, is wrapped up in this chromosome, which we think about XY chromosomes. It's wrapped up all up in there. And inside that wrapping up, it actually wraps around these nucleotides that have these 4 segments in there that are called histones. And on these histones that our DNA is wrapped around, there's these little tails that stick off. And on there, we have something called a marker. Most often it's a methylation marker that sits on that little histone tail and tells us when our DNA, it tells our cells when we unpack that big long strand of DNA to replicate the cell, to reproduce the cell that we're considering, it knows which parts of the DNA to use and which parts to not use to make all the proteins that are needed to make the cell again. It's incredible what's happening under the surface. And this is how you can have the same DNA, but also have a retinal cell, a skin cell, a buccal cell that produces saliva in your mouth, the epithelial cells that line your blood vessels and intestines, but the same DNA, different cells. And the epigenome, we have learned, is what is responsible for whether or not you develop these age-related diseases. And your epigenome is controlled by lifestyle factors predominantly. So longevity lifestyle factors, the third part of the framework, it is things you hear about a lot. It's nutrition, fitness, sleep, mental health, and your environment, like the air you're breathing, the water you're drinking. And if we do a good job optimizing in that space, we can add 5 to 10 years of healthy life just by optimizing those 5 things well. That's how powerful the epigenome is. And to take that even a bit further, in the example you provided, there's a very famous actor that we all know and love, lives just up the street from me, Chris Hemsworth, who went on a docu-series with Dr. Peter Attia, and his docuseries Limitless, season 1, he reveals, and I think this is tremendously courageous and did a service to the public when he did this, and I admire him for it, that he has the double ApoE4 variant. ApoE, you can have E1, E2, E2, E3, or E4, and you have one copy from either parents. So you can either have a 2-2, a 3-3, a 2-3, a 2-4. He has E4, which is the highest risk for Alzheimer's disease development. I think it gives him something like greater than a 50% chance compared to somebody who has the average risk, E3. That's what I have. And so he knows that he has extreme genetic vulnerability to developing Alzheimer's, which is a real eye-opener. Yet, what we have learned is that through those lifestyle factors I just mentioned, optimizing those, he can reduce his risk almost all the way down to that of an average person who's not doing any of those things. So he has a lot of control over whether or not he develops that disease later in life through healthy lifestyle. And that is why disease is not destiny.
Yeah.
That is why we can age in a way where we keep our youthfulness, we keep our independence, our strength, our health, because we simply don't have to get old and sick because of what we learned about the epigenome. So it's a bit of a longer answer, but that's really why the lifestyle factors are so important. And it's what we've learned about the epigenome. And the more we learn about that, the more impressive it is. Particularly now we can estimate one's biological age with the epigenome. And we can even estimate the biological age of individual organs with the epigenome. And there's early stage work ongoing in reprogramming the epigenome, resetting the epigenome to a more youthful state.
Wow.
So there's some really exciting things happening with understanding aging and how it's actually happening. Mostly, well, it's hard to say mostly. A major factor of aging is the modifications that are happening in the epigenome over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons I mentioned sugar, particularly with the ApoE4, is that the recent research I've read, which I suppose is yet to be proven, is that they think in glucose spikes is directly correlated with Alzheimer's onset and progression. So it's interesting when you understand what that risk is, what your genome is, then you can actually, and perhaps some of the causative factors, if we know that, then we can say, what are all of the lifestyle factors? We actually then create a map or a plan of what do we do about this now to stave this off later. And so, as you say, Chris Hemsworth is on that journey. He's obviously fit, he's good looking, and he's not just doing it to look good, he's doing it to optimize his health outcomes, his health span. Amazing. Nick, so before we wrap up for today, is there anything else that you think we should be talking about in this episode for women who are going through the menopause transition, thinking about what do I do now? I've got opportunities to improve my mindset. I perhaps need to know about my disease risk. What's a good starting point? Or what other things do you think we need to mention before we wrap up?
Yeah, thank you. I think I would encourage women who are interested in this mindset piece to check out the free longevity mindset course, because I'm making that free and I'm putting the work in there because I keep telling people, I keep getting asked, where do I start? That's where you need to start. So you can do that. That's free. Doesn't take too long to go through that. And then you come out with this empowered paradigm. Like, oh, it's up to me if I have a positive outlook on my health future. And there's so many resources. And then we walk through the framework that I just mentioned to you by building our strategy, figuring out what lifestyle factors we need to focus on. Then there's this fourth part of the framework, which is the longevity technologies that you can leverage. And there's a lot going on there for women. There's some controversial things. One example is I would consider HRT a longevity technology. And that's also available to men. I know men in the longevity space who are doing testosterone pelleting, and it's most certainly helping them express more youthful characteristics because it's such an important hormone for men. So how do you navigate that at an N of one at a personal level? You've really got to start treating yourself as the opportunity for the self-experiment. Okay, so I'd like women to think of themselves as biohackers. Okay, you can be a lot cooler than you think. All right, I want you to think like you're a biohacker. Now, you get that word in your head, and you're like, okay, what's that? Sounds a little bit weird. You might think of people who are doing very extreme things. Let's boil it down to its basics. What do I want you to do? I want you to measure something in your biology, make a change, and measure again to measure the impact of that change. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say you need to do this is because you need to figure out what works for you. You need to only change one or two things at a time, and you need to be able to have a measurable difference, not just simply I feel better or I think I noticed something, but like I measured my blood work, I measured my biological age, I measured my hormone levels, and I made a change, and I measured it again, and I saw that was a positive change for me. And also you can have the anecdotal, I feel a lot better, I have way more energy. Those things are important, but they're vulnerable to placebo when they're the only thing you measure. If you can think like a biohacker and run what I call self-experiments, which I demonstrate a number of on all the work I do on my website, for example, then you can begin to figure out what works for you. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work for other people. If it works for you, that's what you want to know. Or it doesn't matter if it works for lots of other people if it doesn't work for you. And as we know, menopause is full of examples like that. It is such a complicated, multifactorial change that's a sort of moving target, particularly in perimenopause and early menopause, that this is why so many women struggle with feeling like, oh, what's going on? I just feel different every day and I can't figure out what's happening. Bringing as much control to that as you can in terms of measuring what's going on for you and repeating that is how you can build a bit of a framework for what you can be doing to be feeling your best, to be managing your symptoms, and also to be engaging in healthy conversations with a coach, with a health practitioner who can help ground you a bit and know what to test, what to try, how to do some of that measuring and be guided along the way, because it's a lot what's happening for women in menopause. And one of the tests I think that's particularly interesting, I'll just add this one more thing and you can jump in, is that there is this biological age test called glycan age, Glycan, glycan age. And their test kit has shown some really remarkable things happening during menopause. Anecdotally, they have observed women, their glycan age, a form of biological age, changing by nearly 10 years in 1 year for women going through menopause because it's such a dramatic systemic change in the body. And in particular, they are measuring the glycobiome, which is all the signaling molecules that regulate your immune system and inflammation in your body. And so for women who are going into menopause, who are perimenopausal, measuring your glycan age and tracking that a bit and trying self-experiments to try to reduce your inflammation. One of the most powerful ways to do that is to increase the plant diversity in your diet. There's other ways to reduce inflammation, but being able to start measuring something that captures that aging process itself for your own learning, I think is another example of the power of longevity technologies for women who are going through menopause. And I talk about their test kit on my website as well for people who are curious.
I'm curious about that. We know that inflammation is a key driver of symptoms, and the lower your inflammation, the less severe and less frequent symptoms are. So that's a really important thing for people to know about, that you can get a test to get an insight into what's happening in your body so that you can then make those changes. And as you said, increasing the amount of plants that you eat is a great way to do that. Nick, so important, this discussion. And I think just what I was going to add earlier is around the coaching is that there's all of the things that you mentioned about guiding and understanding what's going on and navigating a path. And there's also being consistent and navigating the obstacles, like oh, this is too hard, or, oh, I feel overwhelmed, or, oh, people are getting in my way. I'm trying to eat well, but kids are bringing junk into the house. That's the stuff that coaching can also help with, is at navigating the obstacles to staying on the path. So just wanted to put my little plug in there for coaching, because
Absolutely.
It's so important. People give up so easily. There's a honeymoon period, excitement, and then we go, oh, I failed again. And that's something that we want to avoid. We want to keep people going on this journey of understanding themselves, having greater confidence that they know their bodies, and finding out what works for them on that highly personalized journey.
This is exactly why we've co-founded
I know.
Sage Women's Health, and why I think it's so important. And to come full circle back to the beginning of that story, when our co-founder David told me, hey, it's going to be menopause, Nick. And I said, oh, no way. And yet here I am a number of years later. What opportunity did I see? Well, this is the most important thing that happens to women in terms of their longevity journey. And it brings up so many obstacles. And it comes at a time in women's lives where, most interestingly to me, they are at the peak of a career. They're often in leadership positions. They might be one step away from a major promotion, and all of a sudden, all of these really difficult changes come into their life. And I think, and we don't have the data to suggest this, I think this is one of those sneaky reasons that we don't have more women in high leadership positions. It's often referred to as a glass ceiling. It's often dismissed as a patriarchy, but like, let's look at what's happening to women when they have these opportunities. And so if we want to create positive change for female leadership in business, in government, in our society, we want to be coaching and encouraging women to take the opportunity of menopause to reinvent themselves, to move through these difficulties with the support of coaching and the programs we're building to deliver to support them in that, because it really can become a powerful transition into a new era of purpose for the next 20, 30, 40 years and beyond of a woman's life.
Well said, Nick. And thanks so much for your time today. Really great discussion. I love everything that you shared. It actually answers a lot of questions that I think many women will have about, what do I do now? What is aging all about? The fact that we go through this time of accelerated aging, as you said, and that we have a choice, and we can make choices going forward that are going to significantly change our quality of life. That's exciting.
It is exciting. And your health future is in your hands. Disease is not destiny.
Great title for this episode. Thanks again, Nick.
My pleasure, Mel.